Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. In Chapter 3 of his Anarchy, State, and Utopia, Robert Nozick is going to be discussing the moral status that we should accord to animals, and obviously he doesn't think that it should be exactly the same as human beings, but he doesn't think that they shouldn't count for anything at all, so that you can do anything that you like to any sort of animal, so long as you're respecting human rights or anything, something like that. So he's going to examine a interesting proposed solution that he is going to sum up as utilitarianism for animals, Kantianism for people. So utilitarianism and Kantianism are two very commonly appealed to ethical or moral theories. Obviously, Kantianism coming from Immanuel Kant, and it says that, at least with respect to human beings, among other things, you shouldn't be using humanity in another person or even in yourself merely as a means to an end, but rather respecting it as an end in itself. But in Kant's view, you can use animals just like you would other objects, right? So where is the utilitarianism coming in? Well, if we allow the Kantian thing to apply to people, persons, then maybe we could say, well, utilitarianism, which looks at the overall benefits and harms, or happiness and misery, pleasure and pain, totaled up into a sum, maximizing the positive, minimizing the negative for all those affected, maybe that could then apply to animals. And so he says, here's how it would work. You would maximize the total happiness of all living beings. So you'd be maximizing human happiness as well as animal happiness, and you would also minimize misery as well, pain, suffering, whatever you want to call it. By the way, he does specify that he's not talking about this as like a goal, but rather more in terms of negative utilitarianism, removing suffering. And then you would place what he calls stringent side constraints on what we may, not what we can, but what we may do to human beings. So there's a lot of things that would count against that, where you would be treating a human being as a mere object, exploiting them, for example, deceiving them from Kant's point of view, right? Whereas it could be okay to deceive animals, provided you get a better payoff by doing so. And so he's going to say, human beings may not be used or sacrificed for the benefit of others, other human beings or other animals. Animals, however, may be used or sacrificed for the benefit of other people or other animals, but only if the benefits overall are greater than the loss inflicted. So, you could sacrifice some animals to feed other animals. You could go into an ecosystem and say, well, we've got too many of these, and this is actually ruining the ecosystem, so let's kill some of these animals so that other animals can then flourish, right? Human beings, you can't say, well, too many of them, let's kill some of them off. That wouldn't be allowable in this approach to things. And he says that You can proceed only if the total utilitarian benefit is greater than the utilitarian loss inflicted on the animals. And so this counts animals as much as normal utilitarianism does people. Following Orwell, we might summarize this view as all the animals are equal, but some are more equal than others, namely human animals, right? So he goes on and then he says, what kind of arguments could we make for this position to the kinds of people who might be affected by or attracted to it, namely Kantians and utilitarians? So to Kantians, we could say this, you reject utilitarianism because it allows an individual human being to be sacrificed to and for another, neglecting the stringent limitations on how we may legitimately behave towards people. Okay, so that's good. But maybe you're going a little bit too far. Could there be something, as he says, intermediate between human beings, persons, and mere objects or things which don't possess, dignity, can't be ends in themselves or something like that? He says, by subtracting or diminishing some features of persons, we would get this intermediate sort of being. So we're not going to say your dog that you love is a person, but we're not going to say they're just a rock or a meat machine either. They're somewhere in between. And so then he goes on and he says, plausibly, animals would be these intermediate beings, and utilitarianism, which we're not going to apply to human beings, rather we're going to apply Kantianism to them, utilitarianism would be good for animals. So it assumes that happiness is all that matters morally and all beings are interchangeable. This conjunction does not hold of persons, but isn't negative utilitarianism true of whatever beings the conjunction does hold for? Doesn't it hold for animals? So you might get some Kantians on board with that, saying, yeah, okay, we're not just going to treat animals as if they don't matter at all. What about utilitarians? This is actually an easier sell, because utilitarians are saying, well, any being that can benefit or be harmed, suffer, right? That can experience pleasure or pain or happiness or misery or whatever else we're taking into account, any such being has to be viewed as part of the moral calculations. And so, what we do with utilitarianism is we look at each of the possible options and we say, okay, who's going to be affected positively and how much and how many of them are there and how many negatively for this option and what about this one? And we're like, well, this one is overall better than this one. So we would take animals into consideration. And do we have to give them exactly the same weight, the mosquito as a human being? Well, maybe a mosquito can't experience pain to the degree that a human being can because it doesn't have much of a nervous system, right? And a human being can feel all sorts of other kinds of pains. Embarrassment. Mosquitoes don't get embarrassed. But it could have just that tiny little iota of pain, and maybe we would take that into account. And it wouldn't be enough to say, don't use mosquito repellent, right? Or don't destroy the little mosquito larvae who are swimming around in the water. And so he says, we could distinguish humans' happiness from that as animals because some things could have more and some could have less. And he says, by the way, Bentham, father of utilitarianism, this is the way that he looks at it. So what would be the outcome of applying this? He says, under utilitarianism for animals, Kantianism for people, animals will be used for the gain of other animals and persons, but persons will never be used or harmed, sacrificed against their will. Now, that means they could be sacrificed according to their will for the gain of animals. So nothing can be inflicted on persons for the sake of animals. Now we get to some of the problems. What if we had some sort of terrible human being who loved inflicting pain on animals? What about penalties for violating laws against cruelty to animals? Can't one save, as he says, 10,000 animals from excruciating suffering by inflicting some slight discomfort on a person who did not cause the animal's suffering? We might feel that this side constraint is too absolute. So maybe the Kantianism needs to be softened somewhat, we could say. There's also another big problem that comes up with utilitarianism itself, what we call utility monsters. Now, these are beings, and they could be animals, they could be human beings, for whom whatever the bad outcome is for everybody else, they gain so much pleasure or happiness or whatever you're going to call it, that it outweighs all the bad that's affecting other people. So we could imagine an evil genius who has a death ray that's going to kill all the human beings on earth and cause them to die in suffering, but that thrills them so much that their happiness is like off the charts, and everybody else, even though, it's not good for them, well, we can say, when we calculate it, it actually pays off better. What should we do with utility monsters? Now, whether or not they exist, that's a different question. But he says that, if people are utility devourers with respect to animals, always getting greater counterbalancing utility from each sacrifice of an animal, we might feel that utilitarianism for animals, Kantianism for people, requiring or allowing that almost always animals be sacrificed makes animals too subordinate to people, so the utility monster thing could create problems that way. From a utilitarian basis, we've got another set of problems. How are we going to calculate it? What measure are we going to use? He says that if we maximize the total happiness, then we add people so long as their net utility is positive and counterbalances the loss of utility their presence in the world causes others. So maybe we'll have tons and tons of people, but we kind of lower the average quality of life. But there's more people, so it works out okay. This, by the way, is something that will figure into the reasoning that Derek Parfit will later use for his repugnant conclusion. Or we might focus on the average happiness, in which case you could have a really crazy scenario where one person who, the evil genius who really gets off on killing everybody else, they kill everybody off. Now there's no more people to feel anything, and the average happiness goes through the roof, or even just averages out. Think about the Twilight Zone, where everybody dies except for this one guy who now will have the time to read his books. Of course, his glasses break and it doesn't turn out well for him. Assume his glasses don't break. Everybody's gone. Now he can have peace and quiet to do that. And so he leads through a few other similar situations as well. And he says utilitarianism's got some problems to it. Now, if you wanted to make it work for people, a utilitarian needs to supplement his view to handle these, and maybe they find the supplemental theory becomes the main one. But he asks a final question at the end. Just for animals, is utilitarianism at least adequate for dealing with animals? And Nozick says no. Why? He says, I think not. If not only the animal's felt experiences are relevant, what else could possibly be relevant? How much does an animal's life have to be respected once it's alive? How can we decide this? He doesn't say he has an answer for this right now. Or do we need to introduce some notion of non-degraded existence? Would it be better to be alive but a test subject who never experiences warmth and love from a human being? Be a dog stuck in a testing facility. Maybe we need an idea of an authentic or non-degraded existence here. He says, would it be all right to use genetic engineering techniques to breed natural slaves who would be contented with their lots? Natural animal slaves. Was that the domestication of animals? Even for animals, utilitarianism won't do for the whole story. But, he says, the thicket of questions
is daunting. So he's not endorsing this view altogether, although it may seem rather attractive as a kind of compromise solution to the problem of, well, how do we take human beings into account and also take animals and the outcomes for them into account?